Today on Inspired Money.
I say that the only growth market in the U.S. is multicultural. And financial services have been the last to go after them. And so I was like, oh, there might be a vertical here for me. And so it was at that point that I said, okay, if I don't do this, someone else is. And to be honest, if you look around, and by that time I had been, done my research as a good lawyer. I did my research in understanding tech and sort of, and you learn a lot. But I said, okay, if I can build something and eventually sell it, I'll make a lot more money than I ever will as a lawyer.
This is episode 124 with founder and CEO of Fintech company My Money, My Future, Ramona Ortega. Welcome to Inspired Money. My name is Andy Wong, a managing partner at Runnymede Capital Management. Each week, we bring you an interesting person to help you get inspired, shift your perspectives on money, and achieve incredible things. From making it to giving it away, Inspired Money means making a difference, creating something bigger than oneself, and maybe, just maybe, making the world a better place. Thank you for joining me. Hey, Inspired Moneymaker, welcome back. If this is your first time listening, welcome. I'm so excited that you've downloaded this episode. Today we're talking to Ramona Ortega. She grew up in poverty, but she worked her way out. She's done international human rights work. She went to law school in her 30s in order to make a career change into corporate finance. In her words, she was poor in places where there was tons of wealth. And so she gave up her steady job to start My Money, My Future, or Mi Dinero, Mi Futuro, a fintech company that empowers Latinas to manage their money with confidence. Arlen Hamilton's venture firm Backstage Capital is an investor. In this episode, you'll learn why Ramona decided to take the leap to launch a fintech startup with a big mission, the challenges of fundraising as a woman of color, and what Ramona would have told her 20-year-old self about money. Those are great tips for us. Now let's get inspired with Ramona Ortega. Ramona, welcome to Inspired Money. It's so great to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Let's jump right in. What's your earliest childhood memory of money?
So I have a couple, and it's I think in context, you got to understand I was, I grew up in Northern California in Napa. I'm the daughter of, really third generation Mexican Americans who had been in California doing migrant farm working and other types of manual labor. And so we never really talked about money in my household because we just didn't really have any. And so I think some of my early memories of money, I remember one distinct time where my father had lost his wallet and someone returned it and he gave them a load of cash. And I realized, somehow I found out that my father never put money in the bank. So he carried all of his money in his wallet. And I remember that because, and I think in reference, I was like, why is there not money in the bank? Like, why is this all in your wallet? And why do you carry it around with you? And, later on, I came to find out, my father was very sort of, even though he was a Vietnam War vet, and so we're speaking today on Veterans Day, but he was very, I think, reluctant and, almost suspicious of the government. He did his time in Vietnam, he came back, and I think like many veterans struggled to find his place. So I think there was, not a lot of trust in sort of financial institutions and government. So that was one of my early memories. I think one right after that was interesting, and I think this really frames why I do the work that I do today, is that I lived in a place, if you think about Napa Valley, it's the wine country. Everyone thinks of it as very lovely, and it is. But there is a massive wealth discrepancy along the lines of race. So you had, Mexican Americans who came through generations to essentially work the vines, right? Or to work in the sort of agricultural industry. And then you had a sort of, well-to-do, well-off population. And so in Napa, where I grew up, you had these two side by side. And so it was literally a line that separated sort of the haves and the have-nots. And so I remember, and I lived in a part of the neighborhood that was fairly white, upper middle class. So I was going to elementary school there. And I would go to my friends' homes for Christmas, and there would just be mounds of presents. And I always remember thinking like, wow, like there's so much stuff here. Like why do you have so much stuff? And because, in comparison, when you come to my house, I mean, it was very much like you get one present. What do you want? And you're lucky if you get it. But you got a couple of gifts, and we had a tree, and it was fine. To be honest, it was fine. But I remember thinking, wow, they have so much stuff. And that was, to me, a very early indicator of like, they have a lot of money and we don't. And all the people that I know in terms of my family, we don't have that we don't have that money. And so I think that was really sort of in my mind, it was very structurally sort of put me on the path of being very cognizant of that imbalance. And it was something I think that drove me throughout childhood and definitely into college in terms of the work that I did early on and then later in life. And eventually come full circle to do the work with My Money, My Future that I'm doing now.
You learned how to hustle really early. Where did that come from? Is that trying to get out of the situation that you had grown up in?
Absolutely. I think that most people who live in poor to working class families learn to hustle. When you don't have economic security, it is actually a form of trauma. And I think what happens is that there's people that learn how to use that trauma or use that hustle to sort of get out. Right. And you see that amongst a lot of people who've sort of come from nothing and been very successful. I would say that there is a absolute sort of, hustle in all of their stories. Luckily, I had always been sort of under the impression I was going to go to school, right? So I think one thing that my parents did that was very helpful for me was that you're going to go to college. Like, this is not sort of an option. We don't know how, and we don't know much about it, but education is the way to go. And I was very lucky that early on, my father would drill into me things like reading. We would read the paper together. Education, I think they were like, you're pretty smart. Like, there was a sense that like, okay, you seem to get things. I was in excelled classes. I really liked reading. And so there was this idea of like, okay, you're smart enough to make it. So we're going to make sure that you somehow go that route. And, it was involved in extracurricular activities and things like that. And I think that really opened me up to, this is what I have. I don't have money. I'm not, super cute and like getting attention that way. It was like, you're smart and you have you're very ambitious. And early on, that was, I think, something that allowed me to take that hustle. And I just, I ran with it. And I've always said that almost the less you have to lose, the more risk you'll take. And I really do think that was my story and continues to be my story. I mean, I left the only economic security I had ever had as a corporate lawyer to go start a startup. That's insane. As a single mother, there's so many reasons that I shouldn't have done that.
I want to hear about how you reached that point to make that decision. Looking at your resume, it seems sort of circuitous. Like you've tried a lot of different things. I saw that you were doing journalism, that maybe you can talk about some of the different things that you're doing. And I noticed that a common thread throughout has been this observing of the haves versus the have-nots and looking around and saying, I don't see others who look like me.
That's right. I think if you're at all sort of you look at a plotting of data of sort of the things that I've done, there is this regression line that goes through what I've done, which is I'm a communicator. So I'm very good at taking information and then communicating it in a way to make it simplified for people to understand. As a journalist, that's what I did. I think you take sort of policy issues and you break them down. So I always covered news. And then I became a social science researcher, and the same thing. You're taking big data sets and writing about them. Throughout that, as you've noticed, I've always focused on this question of equity. I think, again, because it was so stark in my mind, and I was very aware of that and sort of how it played out. And I would say that by the time I was 15 or 16, I very clearly understood that money is about opportunity, and that it's not about how smart you are. It's absolutely about opportunity. And I sort of was exposed to a lot of dimensions of it. I think something else that was a standout in my history is that my grandmother used to caretake for the home of an ex-49er who became a developer. So we had a sort of a home in the Napa Valley that he didn't live, it was his vacation home, but my grandmother lived there and she was the caretaker. So I would go there and my mom and I would help clean the house and make sure it was always prepped in case he wanted to come. And I remember being there one time and just going, what do you do to get this much wealth? Right. And it was so beautiful. Wealth is actually very comforting. And I was like, I want to live in a place like this one day. How do I do that? And, my grandma would tell me stories about he wasn't a 49er, but he made his money in being a developer. And so I think that early exposure to a lot of different sort of aspects of life was very critical in my sort of journey to be like, okay, I know there's more out there. I'm not sure how to get it. And I'm not sure what the path is, but I'm just going to go and I'm going to just try to explore. I was very curious. Again, that takes me back to having a sort of a career in journalism that allowed me to work for 60 Minutes very early on. I came to New York, ended up becoming a researcher at a very well-known think tank, and looking at sort of disparities and public policies, and then having an opportunity to go lead a international human rights organization, which at that point was looking at how do you hold the U.S. accountable to sort of economic, social, and cultural rights, which is very interesting. And it's really about how you get at disparities that still exist. So I think all of that has something in common. And it was during my time in Geneva, I was working on the Finance for Developing conference, where I realized that everyone sitting across the table were sort of white men, older white men, mostly lawyers. And they were the ones that really had the power in terms of the negotiation because they're the ones that had the money or access to the money. And at that point, I realized, we need more of us on that side of the table. It's not enough just to talk about the problem. We need to figure out how to solve the problem. And part of that is understanding finance or understanding how money is made or how it circulates or sort of capital markets in general. And that's when I decided, okay, I'm going to go to law school and I'm going to focus on finance. And that's what I did.
So you went into law kind of as the first puzzle piece to figure out how does money work?
Correct. I was waitlisted at Wharton because I was thinking about doing sort of an MBA or a dual program. I ended up getting into Fordham, and Fordham's got a great reputation in the city, working with a lot of sort of corporate law firms. And I was very lucky to sort of, I think, going as an older student. My son was 7. I was a single mom. I was like, okay, I have to go to law school and have a very particular focus. We're not getting into all this debt and doing this for nothing. I already knew a lot. I'd been in Geneva, I'd been doing international human rights work. I know that part of the problem. So what I need to focus on is the money part and the legal part. And so when my first year, I sort of figured out the lay of the land. And that first summer, I had the opportunity to work as a clerk in Chief Judge Gonzalez's office, which is, he was the chief judge in bankruptcy in the Southern District. And at that time, they were still working on Lehman. So he was, it's sort of a historic point in history where I got to work in bankruptcy in Chapter 11 while these things were still unfolding. And that was just a tremendous experience. And even there, I noticed, even in bankruptcy court, at the highest levels, you pretty much only see white men. And I was like, oh, that's interesting that like at every level where there's sort of this relationship to money and high net worth, I don't see myself represented. And at some point I thought, oh, maybe I'm going to go into distressed debt buying or something like that.
Part of that, of course, is the understanding of how the system works.
Sure.
That one can, if they have an amount of debt that they cannot get over, that they can declare bankruptcy and kind of be forgiven of that debt starting over.
That's right. And so one of the lessons that I learned during that time was that, people talk a lot about Chapter 7 and kind of almost shaming people for filing bankruptcy, personal bankruptcy. You didn't pay your bills. You're not, responsible. Lots of this kind of shame around bankruptcy. And I realized that has to change. Like if corporations can go restructure their balance sheets every couple of years, and many do, airlines, Macy's, number of big corporate names that we know of have restructured many times. Cities restructure their debt. Why is it that, poor people seem to get shamed, especially nowadays when you see so many people in Chapter 7 related to healthcare or health bills, right? Or losing a job or industries closing down. So I think it's really about being able to give people the understanding of why these laws on the books, how do you use them? And again, not to break laws, but to really use them in the best ways. I would much rather see someone restructure their debt and then move on to sort of establish their financial future than to be burdened with debt for 15 years.
And you also worked at the SEC. What kind of things did you see in that role?
Yeah, that was great. I mean, I think it's one of the, best roles I've ever had, just in terms of the information. So my second year, I was part of the summer honors program, and we were working in asset management. And this was right after the rollout of Dodd-Frank. So it was just an exciting time to be there because it was the first time that the SEC was really thinking through how to regulate private enterprises like hedge funds and private equity. And so there was a lot of information, a lot of education. So I really was able to work on a couple of cases that I think just gave me a really deep understanding between bankruptcy and the SEC, a very deep understanding of how deals are structured, how capital markets move money, how the wealthy manage their money, what vehicles they use, how are things set up? What are the different sort of laws that you need to pay attention to? And because you get such a sort of an open book in both of those places, it's not just sort of MBA style. It's not just like sort of thinking through like theoretically. You're actually seeing everything from emails to the documents. And you just get an open book.
Wow. Interesting perspective of being a regulator.
Yes.
You get to see everything.
Yes.
Show me your books. Show me your email.
Yeah, you see everything, especially if you're at the SEC, because by that time you're usually in litigation. And then after that, I actually went and practiced at a boutique firm that focused on securities litigation, so class action securities litigation. And my first case was Madoff. And so right time, right place to get a very deep dive into sort of again, the capital markets, how the wealthy manage their money, and a deep understanding of the full cycle of a business.
So up to this point, any clues into you becoming an entrepreneur?
In retrospect, there is. I have always been entrepreneurial. In fact, a couple of, in between all the different jobs that I had actually had a consulting company. I started a nonprofit, which still exists today in Queens to help Brazilian immigrants. I had, even early on at UCLA, we put together a student youth conference. I raised money for that from a foundation. So there was a lot of roles of leadership and a lot of roles where I was like, if no one's going to sort of open this door, I'm just going to open it myself. And that's something I think that I've seen along the way. And even now, to be honest, I'm a woman of color in Fintech, one of very few, and also one of few women that is raising venture capital, a woman of color, for example. And And as we know, it's already a hard rock to push up the hill. Less than 2% of women get venture capital. It's less than 0.5 for women of color and Latinas. So, I think that when someone says you can't do this, I usually say, okay. And I go and try to do it. I may fail, who knows? But at the end of the day, I have enough I'm not so risk adverse that I won't try.
Those are daunting numbers. And I understand that My Money, My Future started as a newsletter. How did you decide to push this rock up the hill?
Yes, a couple of things happened. I happened to be at a point in time, I think, when Fintech was sort of on the rise. You had seen Fintech was dismantling financial services. You had the rise of a number of Fintechs that were focused on, quote unquote, financial inclusion, women. So that was sort of happening in the background. So I started this newsletter because I was part of a group of Latino lawyers in New York City called Cafecito. And I would talk to some of the women about their portfolios, or about what they were doing with their money. And overwhelmingly, I got responses that were sort of, well, I don't manage that. My husband does. Or I put money in there, but I don't really look at it. It was this interesting sort of almost this gap in confidence. And I thought, wow, here are women who are like at the top of their fields, who really, they know about this. They're smart enough. This is not a I don't know situation. It's money is scary, and I don't feel confident in this. And so I thought, what happened is I looked around and I said, okay, are there other people talking about money and women? And I found a couple that I really liked, but what I noticed that they weren't talking to me as a woman of color. And I mean, I think look, we have a massive racial wealth gap in this country. So we understand that communities of color have certain significant challenges in building wealth, and for a number of reasons in terms of the discrimination and redlining that has happened. And then you got the wage gap. So we experience money differently. And communities of color generally have different nuances and cultural understandings around money. And I'll talk about that in a bit. So I thought, okay, why don't I take the information I have and try to really make it relevant, culturally relevant to this community. And so I started with the newsletter, and it was really just about translating things like, the top 5 things Latinas in love shouldn't do with money. So I was kind of making it engaging and funny. And then we had an event in Los Angeles, and we brought together women for the weekend, and it was over 200 women. We had a financial boot camp for Latinas. And we had all these women come out. We had some sponsors. And I realized, we're onto something here, because people were getting the newsletter, they were getting the information, but they wanted more. They're like, okay, now what? What do I do? Right? And I said, this is perfect. And they didn't want to just be sent to someone else. They didn't want to be sent to just like, okay, so now you need to open up a 401k or an IRA, go talk to Vanguard. They didn't want to talk to Vanguard directly. Even if at the end of the day, that's the account they open up, they wanted someone that they trusted. And so seeing that trust was the biggest factor, and that people wanted more than just an understanding, they wanted to take action. I said, we have to build something. And that was at the time that LearnVest had actually raised a significant amount of money. And I thought, it's a great model. That particular model wouldn't work for my community, but we can build something similar. And then, when you started looking around, I said, no one is doing this. I thought it was pretty incredible, actually. I was sort of like, oh my God, I felt like I found like a kind of a pot of gold, like a secret. And I was like, really? No one is going after the multicultural millennial market?
Which is big.
Huge. The demographic shift is happening. I think it's 6 out of 10 Latinos are under the age of like 18. I mean, the numbers are incredible in terms of the demographic shift, and saying, hey, here's a whole community, a whole demographic, a big one, and it's growing. I say that the only growth market in the U.S. is multicultural, and financial services have been the last to go after them. And so I was like, there might be a vertical here for me. And so it was at that point that I said, okay, if I don't do this, someone else is. And to be honest, if you look around, and by that time I had been, done my research as a good lawyer. I did my research and understanding tech and sort of, and you learn a lot. But I said, okay, if I can build something and eventually sell it, I'll make a lot more money than I ever will as a lawyer.
And you have student loans to pay off.
And I have student loans to pay off. And I'm already an older, I went to law school in my 30s. So I was like, look, I kind of have to take a lot of risk to get a lot of reward here. And so it was a very calculated sort of risk-benefit analysis. And so that's sort of what made me take the lead. I said, someone's going to do this. This is a huge white space. If not me, whom?
Coming up, we talk about building an app, building a brand for millennials, fundraising, and so much more right after this short break. The show notes for this episode can be found at inspiredmoney.fm/124. If you're listening in your car, wherever you are, check the show notes if you want to learn more about Ramona and other things mentioned in this episode. It's time for the Runnymede Money Tip of the Week. Today, I want to share a public service announcement with you that consumer advocates, auditors, and police departments around the country have been issuing, and this could affect your money. When you write a date on a document, don't shorthand the year 2020 to just 20. Write out the whole year. For example, if you have a form or official document and you dated it 1/4/20, as in 1/4/20, it could easily be changed to 1/4/2021 by adding the 21 at the end. Basically, a scammer could backdate a contract or change the date to a future time. It's still early in the year, and there's no evidence yet that anyone has been scammed in this way. But I've seen this story in multiple places, and the solution is easy enough. Just write out the year in 4 digits. So I figure it's better to be safe than sorry. That's the Runnymede Money Tip of the Week. Hey, if you want to help the Inspired Money podcast, there's still time to complete a short survey that I created at inspiredmoney.fm/survey. I want to know how we can serve you better. What do you like about the podcast? What improvements do you think we should make? Submit your feedback before January 15th, and you might win an Amazon.com gift card. If you don't feel like doing the survey, but you want to share your thoughts, send me an email by going to inspiredmoney.fm/Andy. Or better yet, let's chat. Schedule a 15-minute call at inspiredmoney.fm/15. That's 15. You're listening to Inspired Money. I'm Andy Wong. So you decided to build an app and platform. It's really interesting because it kind of goes back to your journalist background with the newsletter, and you're trying to educate people. It's almost like you're creating a publication to help people. You got the early proof of concept through the financial boot camp. What's your first move to decide how do you know how to build an app?
I had an idea in my head of what I wanted. And I think this is what's different about me as a founder, as a non-tech founder, as someone who didn't, drop out of Stanford to go do this in my 20s, was that I started with a user in mind and then built a product for that user. Most tech companies and most early founders will generally build something and then go try to find product market fit, right? So they're going to then figure out who's going to use their product. I kind of started in the opposite with a very specific market and segment and then built for that. A couple of questions that I asked myself. One is, what would I have told my 20-year-old self? And that's pretty easy. Credit is king. I would have taken way more care of my credit. I would have understood it. I would have taken care of it, etc. I would have started investing earlier. I've been working since I was like 16. I could have had a lot more money by now. And I would have had more of a plan, right? I would have thought about the long-term sort of goal and the picture. I've always kind of lived almost sort of like, short term. We're talking like 6 months. Everything is, and I think that's part of the hustle and it's part of not having economic stability in my life, right? So those are the things that I started with. And then I did a lot of sort of user research with people. So I would sit down and I would talk to people like, what are you doing with your money? Why are you doing that? What are your fears? What do you think your goals are? And also understanding how do they make money decisions? And overwhelmingly, what I realized is that, yes, communities of color have very nuanced challenges or financial behaviors that I'd like for our platform to address. One of them being family. Family is key. Many people still make decisions in a familial way, right? So whether it's parents helping them buy their first car, or they still live at home, or they think about, I'm going to be taking care of my parents. So that's a very interesting and significant issue, which is, particularly for immigrant families and an immigrant across the board, not just Latino, that yes, I have an obligation and responsibility to take care of my parents. And so even if my parents did have a retirement plan, and to be honest, a lot of them did not, that's something I have to think about. Also thinking about other people in my family that might need financial assistance. So there's a lot of decisions that are made or impacted by family. So that was one thing. Two, that people did not want to talk about their money because they felt a lot of shame. So there was this sort of like, I should know this and I don't. My white counterparts know this and I don't want to feel stupid. And I also don't want anyone to make me feel stupid. So I don't want to talk to anyone because I don't want anyone to see my stuff. And so those were a couple of things that came up. And I was like, okay, so we need to correct for those in our app. I thought about when I sat down with people, what are the kind of things that people need to know? Like, if we could break it down to 5 things, what are the 5 things that people need to have and know to even have a chance at building economic security into the future? And also mobility, by the way. It's not just economic security, but it's mobility. You have to understand and appreciate credit. So there's this myth in a lot of communities of color that credit and debt is bad, when we know that the rich don't consider debt bad. It's the kind of debt.
You have to know how to use it.
You have to leverage debt. So yes, there's certain kinds of debt that are bad, and it depends then how you use that debt, right? So if you use debt to buy another home that makes money, great. In credit card debt, not so much.
Right, and sometimes it's a math problem because you're figuring out what's the opportunity cost, how are you using your money best? Opportunity
cost. What does that mean? Most people don't understand that, right? So that's something that we would break down. So the way that we sort of really sketched it, and by the way, like literally I sketched the app out in a sort of like design thing and then worked with developers to build that out. And I also became fairly versed in tech talk. So I kind of understood like APIs and algorithms and how we can like use the database and SQL databases. So I got pretty up to date on that so that I could work with my developers so that they can really bring to life my vision. Because most developers are like, tell me what you want to code. That's it. They're not thinking through the end user. And so I said, I want to make sure that people have this foundation and to see their progress in this financial foundation. Again, it would be credit, investing, emergency savings, budgeting, insurance.
How do they see that? Is it visual in the app?
Exactly. And so we have those 5 as the foundation, and we ask you some questions when you open your account to see what you have and what you don't have, and then your financial challenges, like what is thing that you want to work on first. And then the way we built it out was around financial, what we call action plans, right? Which is someone comes on and they're like, yeah, I really need to take care of my credit card debt. So the first thing we're going to do is put them on that plan, and it's going to show you, here's the basics of the credit card, like, your credit report, your credit score. Go and get your credit report right now. Stop, go get it. Here's the link. Go get it. You're free. Download it. Here's where you can get your credit score, and then taking you through sort of like, what do you do next? Now we need to figure out what you need to pay off first. Which of your credit cards has the highest interest rate? So essentially thinking through, what would somebody do if I was sitting down with you, and then digitizing that in a checklist form. And then what we've added to that is that and let me step back. So you can tell someone what they need and they could buy in and they're like, okay, sure. Yeah, I told it. And then you're like sending them off on their own. They're going to get overwhelmed and they're probably not going to do it. So that's something that we built into the platform. Do the education, get them acquainted with what they're thinking through, whether it's credit or investment, then walk them through the process and then introduce the products that they might use. And that's our business model. So when we walk them through our checklist, at the end on that sort of page is the action plan. We've also introduced, here are some partners where if you want to take action right now to, let's say, open up an account, you can do that with one of our partners, and then we get a referral fee. Now, this is a old school model. I mean, Credit Karma, NerdWallet, Sesame Credit, Acorns, everyone's doing it. People don't realize they're doing it, but this is the model. You're essentially selling other people's products on your site. And what we do is we vet those products for things like fees, making sure that they're, sort of, it's a legit product. This is something that's been in the market. It's digital. So we want to make sure that we're sort of suggesting, and they don't have to buy them. These are just like, hey, if you want to take some action now, you can do so. And then the idea of the platform was really about a one-stop shop for all things money. Because that's, I think, with the unbundling of the sort of banks through fintech, what we're really thinking through now is the rebundling. Nobody wants 10 apps to manage their money, right? And you've got so many competitors now in a single vertical. The robo-advisors, I can name like 7 robo-advisors. Are any of them better than the next? I mean, I'm sure they all think they're better than the next. And it's fine. Competition is great, right? But I think people feel overwhelmed. It's like, if you already don't know what you're doing or you're sort of like hesitant, the last thing you're going to do is like, which one of these 7 should I buy?
I love the financial literacy and education aspect, then the action plan that helps people to get started with an actual checklist. Is it the accountability and keeping users on the platform? Is that your secret sauce?
I think you're always refining your secret sauce. I think one of the aspects of our secret sauce is really the company brand. We've done a fairly good job, and again, this is with limited resources, getting out there and really sharing our message, which is no shame in the money game, money made simple. So things that like keep them attracted to us because it's relatable. Also, my own story, and as the CEO, as the founder of the company, I think it's really important that people understand that, because with particularly millennials, and that is our target market, and I'll tell you a little bit about why. But our target market at this point, really, trust is a major issue, and they want to affiliate with a brand that they trust and that they care about. And I think that's our secret sauce, is that we are authentic in every way, and that's not something even a Vanguard with all the money in the world can do.
And it's interesting that you want to have that almost personal sounding relationship, but you're doing it through an app. And as you mentioned, that it's almost like having a one-on-one coach. Why is it important to you as the founder to be leveraging technology so that it's even more scalable? Sure.
I think, well, you just said it. I think leveraging technology to scale is the key. I can't talk to, 1 billion people, right? And for me, it was always important, because one of the things when I started doing the research, when you look around, there are plenty of financial education, financial literacy programs all over, whether nonprofits and companies. But the problem that I saw is that it was very basic. And the message to me actually was wrong. Save, save, save. People need to invest. Rich people don't save, they invest.
Your money has to work for you.
Your money has to work. I mean, you may have some liquidity and an emergency savings, and yes, absolutely. But this message that it's almost like you're teaching people to be good with money because they don't know how to be good with money. And that is something that we are absolutely against. Poor people know how to be good with their money because they're living off a lot less than most people. So it's about, how do you make your money work for you? That's the key for us. And so I think that message really resonates. And for me, the scalability was about, how do we take it outside of financial literacy? Do we have a component of financial literacy? Yes, but so do high net worth wealth advisors. When you sit with your client and you're telling them about the tax law and why it's beneficial for them, that's financial literacy. So this sort of notion that financial literacy had to be dumbed down for people with no money or not as much money as high net worth individuals. And by the way, a lot of these people have money. We're not going after the unbanked. We are going after the highly upwardly mobile, multicultural millennial who's the first mover in their family. And that's another reason that we wanted to use technology. Especially the Latinx market is way over indexed on mobile. They have a lot of, in terms of their relationship to a brand, they are most likely to refer a brand across their colleagues and friend circle and also with family. And if we target the millennial who at this point is now sort of, early 30s, they are the ones that are also going to help their parents make financial decisions. So we figured we can target them and they can be the source of the financial sort of guidance in their families because we know that they operate as a family unit.
Sounds exponentially, at least within the family, impactful. You had this realization at age 16 because of the cleaning the NFL 49ers.
It's a beautiful house. One day I hope to buy it. Actually.
And you talked about you had this realization that money's about opportunity. How difficult has it been as a woman of color and being an entrepreneur in fundraising? How do you make those opportunities happen?
Yes, it's not been fun. I will say this. I wear resilience literally like an armor, like a coat of armor, really, because I think most people would have just closed doors. I mean, it's been extremely hard. I'm very lucky that I have a lot of skills and I've been able to leverage them to ensure that I have a basic sort of income coming in to cover, my family. I'm a single mom. I mean, my family's been incredibly supportive in this endeavor because it really does take a family. I mean, it takes a village literally to start a company like this. Look, if I was anyone else, we would already have a significant amount of money in the bank, right? So if you want to check off the traditional markers for investability in Silicon Valley, huge market, huge market. We're talking 52 million and growing just in the U.S., not to mention 125 million millennials in Latin America if we expand there, right? So our market's huge. Our unit economics make a ton of sense. We have like a 90% margin at scale, right? In terms of the business model. Leadership, right? I mean, literally like, if not me, whom, right? I mean, I have this incredible background in both journalism, in finance, and sort of authentic voice, someone who comes from the community, right? So all the sort of check mark.
You know your customer well.
I know my customer, all of these things. And yet the markers always seem to move. Well, you're not here yet. And so we understand that there's a lot of bias built into the whole model of VC, right? So people are going to invest in what they know. There's not many people they know that look like me. And that's a problem. We will get there and we will end up probably having to be revenue first and raise a larger round later on. Right now, we have some angel investors that have been supporting us. We have some early interest, some of the bigger sort of VC firms. We're just going to have to really cross so many more rivers or hurdles to be able to be qualified in their eyes. Now, what that hopefully means is that I'm going to own a lot more of my company. And once we get to be, not only profitable, but very successful, because this is the thing, this is just a matter of time. At some point, very soon, in the next 3 to 4 years, you're going to see this shift where people are going to say, oh, yeah, there's all of these people out there that aren't coming to put their money and their investments in our institutions. How do we get at them, right? And no one's going to be there except we're going to still be there. And then all of a sudden, we're going to have a very big value proposition. So it is extremely hard right now. There's no doubt about that. And I think that part of it is that they haven't seen someone like myself be successful. So we haven't had an IPO. We haven't had a big acquisition by a founder of a company that looks like me.
Yeah, it sounds like a potentially valuable exit strategy sometime down the road.
I hope so. That's the goal. I mean, it really is. I mean, I think, look, this is a very particular game. We always talk about money as like knowing the rules of the money game, right? It is. And you have to know how to play it, and you have to know what the rules are. At the end of the day, investors give you money so they get a payout, right? And they hope that payout is 10x. It might be, might not be. There's plenty of companies that are successful. They give a 3x, for example, right? Or maybe you IPO and that's successful. Although they've been dumping a lot of really bad IPOs on the market lately, but that's a whole other story. We will eventually get to either an exit. If you think about the big finance, the more, look, the Wells Fargos of the world, the Prudentials, the MetLifes, they will need to capture this market over the next 20 years. I mean, it's just, you've got boomers who are starting to retire, which means that they're going to start taking down money. And then you have, just on a macro level, a shift to 401ks instead of pension plans, right? And so you have less people putting in money into the coffers, right? And you almost have no sort of pension funds anymore.
Yeah, no more.
Right. And then you have an extraordinary amount of student debt that is holding back sort of even middle income sort of millennials, for example. So all of these things are coming together, which means that they need to look for new markets. This is an untapped market.
You got to follow the growth.
Exactly.
Ramona, I'd like to ask all the Inspired Money guests, how do you define success?
When people ask me, oh, you're so successful, I was like, well, no, I don't actually think that I'm successful. I think that I haven't given up. My motto is never be comfortable where you are. That's a motto for me, that if you've made it this far, you can make it further. But given that, I will say that success should be measured from where you've come. So how far have you come from where you started? Because success could have been me just graduating from UCLA. That was a huge success. I was the first one in my family to graduate. Success could have been the first person to move out of California. I'm the first to be in New York City. Success could have been going to law school. So it's really a measure from where you come. And I think, somebody had interviewed me around sort of the self-made, millionaire or billionaire, and what does self-made mean, and some of the names that come up, and you're like, well, are they self-made? I don't know. They already had a huge step up. And I do think that that's the measure, right? It's like, look, if you came from nothing and you got here, that's a success. And so for me, at least, success will be going as far as I can go to set that sort of new standard, to be that new sort of benchmark, so that it's a little bit less, challenging for the next person. And then in terms of financial success, it will be about building a legacy and leaving one for the next generation.
Well, I love your suggestion for people to stay uncomfortable. It's a great one. And in terms of legacy, what do you want your legacy to be?
I want to be known for moving the needle on the racial wealth gap, right? We actually, and I mean, this is not one of these sort of I'm changing the world in Silicon Valley quotes. This is really like, if we can scale and even let's say we can take 10% of market share and get people on these plans and to have them investing, to have them buying life insurance, to have them, put money into a 529, to understand that they can leverage debt, we can move their ability to build wealth, and we can help them build wealth in ways that they may not have never done. Because most people are not going to go to a financial advisor. That's not something that a majority of Americans do for a number of reasons. But we want to be able to help people make the decisions in their life and to start early enough, because it's time over money, right? It's not how much you invest, it's how long you invest. Start young. Even 10, 15 years in, you can see a difference. And so that's what my legacy is going to be, is that someone who's worked on this issue and really tried to create a solution that's scalable.
Yes, your money has two best friends, time and compounding. Thank you, Ramona. Thank you for sharing your story and your company with us. Can you tell the Inspired Money listener how they can follow you and learn more?
Absolutely. They can go to mymoneymyfuture.co. visit our website. You can also follow us on Instagram at My Money, My Future. And then you can also follow us on Twitter at My Money, My Future. We also, I just want to plug, we are looking to partner with both companies, small companies and universities to implement a B2B where we will be providing sort of a financial wellness solution because that's the next step for us.
Thank you so much, Ramona. So what was your favorite inspired money moment? Did you have one? I love learning about Ramona's story of growing up, helping to clean the former NFL player's beautiful home, and I hope that she'll be able to buy it someday. For me, I really admire Ramona's perseverance, her thick skin, and her tendency to want to do something even more when someone tells her that they don't think she can do it. If you had a different favorite inspired money moment or thoughts on today's topic, I hope to see you in the Inspired Moneymakers Facebook group. Find us at inspiredmoney.fm/Facebook. If you liked this episode, please do me a favor and share it with someone, or post it to social media and tag a friend. For that, I'd be extremely grateful. Thanks for joining me. If you're not yet subscribed, I hope that you'll do it now. It'll just take 1 second, and it'll ensure that you won't miss next week's show. I'll see you then. The music you're listening to right now and all other music on today's show is by the amazing Jim Kimo West. Have an inspired week and do something that scares you, because that's where the magic happens.